Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for the webinar presenting the results of a cost-benefit analysis of the implementation of persistent identifiers in the Czech Republic. My name is Lucy. I'm a member of the EOS Training Center, and I'm going to guide you through the seminar today. Firstly, Hanna Heringova from the National Library of Technology is going to give us some background information of the analysis. And then Josh Brown and Phil Jones from MoreBrains Cooperative are going to explain us what the implementation of persistent identifiers can bring us in terms of efficiencies in administration, savings in time, etc. So let's briefly introduce the speakers. Hanna leads the National Center for Persistent Identifiers in the National Library of Technology. And Josh, expert in strategy and research, and Phil, specialist in digital and technology, are from MoreBrains. MoreBrains Cooperative is a team of consultants who specialize in and share values of open research. They help organizations with setting policies, designing infrastructures, and conducting analysis, and many others. I would like to ask you maybe to leave the questions at the end of the presentation. And now I would like to pass the word to Hanna.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. So once again, thank you, Lucia, for the introduction, and hi everyone. I'm just going to say a few words about why the cost-benefit analysis was actually conducted to give you a little bit more context around it. Actually, close this. Yeah. So as you might or might not know, the National Library of Technology is a holder of a national project called CARDS, Czech Academic and Research Discovery Services. And as part of the CARDS project, we have received funding, among other things, for creation of a new department called the National Center for Persistent Identifiers. The goal of the center is to provide methodological, administrative, but also financial support for adoption of persistent identifiers, namely ORCID IDs, DOIs, but also others in the Czech research development and innovation ecosystem. The National Center runs three specific services. One of them is the National iAssistant Center, which is a very traditional agenda that the National Library of Technology has been in charge of for many years. And two new, let's say, services that we created in 2023 are called the National DOI Center and the National ORCID Center. The National DOI Center facilitates access to basically registration of DOIs through the registration agency called DataCite. And it's basically a national consortium, so a group of research institutions, using a specific service together under conditions. And the second service is the National ORCID Center, which is, or we can talk about it as a National ORCID Consortium. And that center is basically facilitating access to premium services from ORCID, which means basically being able to integrate ORCID into institutional and national information systems on different levels. We currently have, I believe, 12 institutional members in the National DOI Center and 25 institutions as members in the National ORCID Center. But both consortia are intended and able to support up to 110 institutions by the end of the CARDS project in 2028. And thanks to the CARDS funding, we are actually able to cover all the fees connected to the membership of Czech institutions in those services or in those centers. So as you can imagine, that entails, pretty significant amounts of money, and this is why we wanted to make sure that we are able to justify this investment into persistent identifiers, but also to the national support of persistent identifiers adoption. And we really wanted to make sure that we know, that there was a difference made because the National Center is here, and there are visible or quantifiable results of its services. So this is why we decided to commission a cost-benefit analysis of the persistent identifier implementation with MoreBrains. There was a first phase of the analysis conducted in the second half of 2024. There's going to be a next phase in 2028 at the end of the CARDS project. Once again, just so that we can really measure what happened in this time frame. The results of the first phase that Phil and Josh are going to present very shortly are available in English and Czech in the institutional repository of the National Library of Technology. And just a little pitch at the end, we are running a website called identificator.cz. So in case you want to learn about persistent identifiers, but also services that support their implementation in the Czech Republic, you can go for more information there. And please don't hesitate to reach out to us in case you have any questions or you are interested in using our services. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to let Phil and Josh present the findings of the cost-benefit analysis. Thanks.
Thank you, Hannah. I'll just share my slides. Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Lucy and Hannah, for the introduction and for hosting this webinar. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to start. My name is Josh Brown. I'm one of two presenters from MoreBrains this morning. I'm going to start by introducing some of the background and the strategic importance of identifiers, and then my colleague Phil will take us through the methodology that we use for the cost-benefit analysis and explain the findings. Towards the end, I'll talk about the recommendations and some of the next steps and why those matter, and talk a little bit about what's going to be done in the second phase of this project that Hannah mentioned in 2028. So let me start by talking about how PIDs can save money. So persistent identifiers can be used at every stage of the research life cycle. This illustration shows how some of these connections could work. You have funders on the left in the graphic you can see on the screen, researchers and institutions at the top and the bottom, and publishers and platforms that hold data sets and other repositories, and for instance, on the right. In the center, you have the different PID registries, and information about identifiers and the metadata associated with them can be transferred to and from registries all the way around the circle. The benefits of PIDs are that an open PID enables information in the form of metadata to move between systems freely and to be reused in those systems, which is a lot of the way that benefits are generated. Efficient, because that automation means that there is time savings. People don't need to actually type this data in and hand it over. It's trackable. The connections between the PIDs support all kinds of analysis and understanding of research and reduce any kind of reporting burden as well. Fundamentally, though, it also is for the benefit of the whole technological ecosystem, because it requires on standards, integrations between all of these parties, where people use consistent systems and consistent approaches to generate, curate, and share metadata. At the moment, though, a lot of these connections are actually missing. So all of the benefits that we're describing are not being delivered because this automated exchange of information is simply not taking place consistently. Now, in any country that's not some of these things will be present. As Hannah was just describing, you have a DataCite consortium, an ORCID consortium. Many of the members of those consortia will have API integrations and will be passing information either out to DataCite when they register DOIs, or possibly putting organizational affiliations or publications into the ORCID registry as well. The consequence of those missing connections, though, which are many more than just DataCite and ORCID, is that information about grants, data about research activities, information about publications is held by researchers. Sometimes they share it with administrators. Sometimes the administrator knows that information. And all of these people are putting that information into repositories, current research information systems within institutions, funding application systems, reporting platforms, different grant management systems, a range of different things. And then when they publish, they're going to the publisher platforms and putting the same information in again. All of this is duplicated effort. And there's a huge amount of time that goes into that. And it introduces errors because a lot of this typing of information is done manually. The scale of this effort is shown by this case study. In Australia, the National Research Council, the Australian Research Council, did an integration with ORCID and Crossref that populated people's funding applications automatically with the information to support their grant proposal. And in this case study, Joe Shapter, who's a very senior researcher with a long career behind him, said that for each grant application, that integration, the automatic creation of his grant application saved him 3 to 4 days for every grant he applied for. And that was an amazing difference. And it shows the level of effort that is being required of researchers and their support teams to do this work. So there's a huge amount of saving here for researchers and for research administrators in institutions, but at the national level, there are also significant benefits. For example, if you want a modern digital research system, you do need identifiers. There are a huge number of entities, whether that's publications, data sets, data management plans, pre-registrations for different studies, facilities. All of these things are connected in a great web of digital information, and making sure that you can identify every single one of those and understand their relationships to the others is critical. All of this is really important, but making sure that information is accurate and complete serves a number of priority areas. Now, examples here, which are really relevant, are the National Research and Innovation Strategy, the RIS3 strategy, and the National Research Development and Innovation Policy. Now, both of these call out the need for improved digitalization, better information to support decision-making, and really importantly, increases in efficiency of research and of information sharing. All of these priorities are served by the use of persistent identifiers. It's also the case that they help to reinforce the value of existing infrastructures. So IS4VI already delivers efficiencies by the same principles as identifiers. It's this cooperation in sharing data and enabling the reuse of data that has already been entered once without it having to be added to that. Now, if you add the reuse of metadata from persistent identifiers to this proven approach, you get improvements of efficiency within institutions. So IS4VI is working at the national level, but within the processes within an institution, those PIDs can improve that and make exchanging data with IS4VI easier and more efficient as well. So it really does help to continue to justify ongoing investments and updates in all of these systems. Finally, I think there's a major policy component here about open research, Plan S, which is that a group of international funders coming together to drive forward open research and open access publishing, have a very strong emphasis on the use of identifiers in their technical specifications and requirements. The European Open Science Cloud has a PID policy and is funding a number of persistent identifier infrastructures to enable open research. Also, publications, data, etc., resulting from European Commission funding should be easily identifiable using persistent identifiers. So all of these reasons, it's really important that we understand the wider context in which PIDs are useful, and also think about the specific benefits they will bring to Czech researchers and institutions. And I'll pass over to Phil to talk us through that.
Thank you, Josh. So now I'm going to build on what Josh has said around the direct and indirect benefits of persistent identifiers and their adoption. And I'm going to take you through how we have made those savings quantifiable and how we've counted them. So if we go to the first slide, so just to remind you, the mechanism that we're looking at is for direct cost savings only. So this is the sort of thing that researchers, administrators, research support staff, and professional services people spend an awful lot of time rekeying the same information about grants, about projects, about publications, and about people into system after system after system. So there's an overhead, there's a burden here, and we're trying to quantify what that burden looks like. So next slide. So we have split it up into 3 entities that are quantifiable. The data exists that we can count them. We have inputs to research performing organizations, and by that we mean grants. So the number of grants that are issued every year. We look in the middle here at the activity that's going on within institutions. That's the number of active projects for any given year. And then on the right, we have the outputs from that institution, which is the number of publication authorships. So 3 phases: inputs, activity, and outputs make up the amount of activity that we are able to quantify within institutions. So where do we get this data from? So our primary data source is the database that the information system that Josh already previously mentioned, that is IS4VI. Now, IS4VI consists of 4 modules. They're listed out here on the left, and the last 2 are the ones that we're particularly interested in. One is the database of awarded grants, CEP, and the other one is the database of research outputs. So that makes up the central spine of the data that we use, those grants and those research outputs. Okay, so next slide. The thing is that IS4VI concentrates on Czech research activity, so it's Czech funding and publications, mostly publications that are a result of Czech funding, although it is slightly more expansive than that. But in order to get a fuller, more complete picture, we have harmonized in data from our data partner, Digital Science, which comes in their Dimensions database. Now, importantly, Dimensions contains all of the EU funding that is in the Cordis database, which you are probably familiar with. So Horizon Europe, Horizon 2020, and so forth, but also data from non-European funders in the US, in Asia, and Australia, and so forth. There's quite a lot of collaboration that goes on in academia, so we wanted to make sure that we captured all of the data and harmonized it as effectively as possible. So that's why we've supplemented the central spine of IS4VI with Dimensions data. Okay, so moving on. So the number of grants awarded, the important thing to look at from this slide is that when we count the number of grant awardees, we are not just counting the number of grants. So if a grant has been awarded by a funder to multiple institutions, it counts for each institution that is awarded to. So 2 co-awardees means it counts for 2. 4 co-awardees means it counts for 4. The reason why we do that is because each institution also has to account for that grant, put it into their own research information systems. The next slide. This tells us the number that we actually managed to count. So this is from that data from IS4VI with augmented by Dimensions. And as you can see, we've got significant numbers of grants awarded every year, approximately about 2,000 grants every year. And over on the right, there's the major funders in order of volume of research awardees there. Okay, so that's grants. Let's talk about projects. Projects is a little bit trickier because there are no central databases of projects anywhere in the world. It's just historically, that's not how information systems around research management have evolved. So what we have to do is we have to look at the relative sizes of research information, of research environments from country to country, and then we benchmark it. So comparing the relative sizes is fairly straightforward because we can look at the numbers that are in the OEC database of total R&D spend. So that's a reasonable proxy of the size of a research environment within a country. To benchmark it, what we do is we benchmark against the number of projects that we estimate are going on in the UK at any given time. And for that, we've relied on the expert advice of the chair of Association of Research Managers and Administrators in the UK. That's Dr. Simon Kerridge. So he gave us a good number for the UK, and we have basically every country that we do this analysis for, we use that as the benchmark and we scale it on using the OECD figures. Okay, so the next slide gives us the numbers around that. So we found there's by scaling that number from the UK of 50,000 by the relative sizes of the research environment, we find that there are nearly 5,000 active projects every year in the Czech Republic. That's our estimate. Okay, so the next slide. Publication data. Now, this is a little bit familiar, this slide. It looks a little bit like the grant slide, doesn't it? Because we've done something a little bit similar. We've taken that RIV database and we've analyzed that, supplemented it with dimensions, and we count the number of authorships. And that's because the number of authorships is what's most important in understanding the level of burden, because each individual author is responsible for accounting for their own research activity. So we count the number of authorships that are affiliated with a Czech institution. So next slide. So we found there's about nearly 70,000 publications that we were able to find, and that accounts for about 146,000 authorships every year. And there you can see on the right the institutions from which those authorships came. Right. So that's that. That's the data. So as you remember, we are trying to figure out what that total burden of effort is for researchers and for administrators. So we have to figure out how much time all of this takes. So for that, we rely on some previous research that has been done by ourselves and from some other folks. And we find the number of times that publications and grant metadata and project metadata are entered into various systems. So all those systems that we talked about. And there's some numbers on this slide, 3.25 and 3.1 and 6 times respectively for the various types of entities into various types of systems. Then the question becomes, how long does each of those individual rekeying events actually take? And again, we've got some research here that we've cited, and we find 6.43, 6 minutes and 43 seconds for publication metadata. Grants and project metadata is estimated to take around 10 minutes for each of those individual events. So that's all of the data taken that we've used. How do we summarize that together? So if we go to the next slide, we now need to look at the salary data. So we turn the amount of time spent every year into money by multiplying it by the amount of salary and also reasonable overheads. And we get that data from the Czech Ministry of Labour and Social Affairs National Survey on average earnings. Those are all of our variables. So next slide. This is just an easy graphical representation of what we do with all of those variables. We've got the number of entities. We've talked about projects. We've talked about grants. We've talked about publication authorships. We have the number of people or institutions. Then we have the number of times that things are entered, various entities are entered into the various systems. And then we have finally the salary and overheads for each of those people that are entering those systems. And that little sort of Greek symbol on the left means that we sum that over each entity type. So projects, research, grants, and publications. And that's our calculation. Okay, so let's go to the findings now. So I apologize for the fact that we're going to show you some spreadsheets. It's not always the easiest thing to look at in a presentation, but these are the results, if you like. If for more detail of this, of course, you can go to the report. These are all in the reports and explained in much more detail. So you can see we've got publication, grant, and project descriptions over on the left-hand side here. We've got those variables that I talked about, the number of entities. The next column is the number of rekey events. Then we've got the number of minutes for every event. And then we've got some calculations. We've got the time savings per year in person days. And we find that sort of number in the bottom there, approximately in the middle, over 7,000 person days of effort that is spent, and some might say wasted, rekeying information into various systems that isn't necessary. Then the next column is the cost of author per minute for people entering that data. So that's that's the time burden cost. And then on the right-hand side, these are our estimates for how much this actually costs in Czech koruna. And you can see that number right at the bottom, 33 million Czech koruna per year. Okay, so next. So the important thing to remember is this doesn't go from 0 to 100% cost savings overnight, there is, of course, a level of technology diffusion is the technical term for it. It takes a while for things to pick up. People have to adopt it. And we recognize that PIDs are network entities, therefore they are subject to network effects. Now, what a network effect is, if you're unfamiliar with it, is a little analogy for telephones. If you're the only person in the world with a telephone, it is of almost no use to you. If your friend has one, it's a little bit more useful. If all of your friends have one, it's really useful. And if everybody in the world has one, it's really, really valuable. And so there's a little bit of maths that we use to map the amount of adoption to the fraction of the benefit. So it's not linear, it's got a little bit of a curve to it, and that's because that network effect changes as you increase adoption. So let's cascade that through for the next slide. And here's another table for you. And what we can see is as the adoption increases, between about 50 and 55%, we start to see break even. So Hannah talked about the costs of running cards, and we've also talked about in the report we talk about the cost of implementation of various PID services, and we have to measure that against the level of adoption and the savings that we expect. And there you can see that's how it all sort of washes out. The thing to take home from this is about 50 to 55% adoption, you get break even. Another thing to consider is that with the support we've done two scenarios here, one without central support and then one with that central support. And as you can see, that central support, because we've got cost savings, because we're reducing duplicate of effort, particularly around things like education and resources, that means that we get the savings earlier and we get bigger savings in the end. So it's good reason to have that central support service, good justification for that. And what we can also say is that we can use this table to set targets, if you like. So 50 to 55% is a minimum. If we get into 60 to 80%, then we're yielding significant savings. All right, so the next slide. Another thing that we looked at is the consortia, which Hannah also mentioned. So this is based on current levels of consortia membership. This shows the amount of savings that you're receiving based on a comparison of if each institution had to become their own member. And as you can see, we've got significant savings, 3 million down there in the bottom right at current levels of membership. And of course, as the membership of those two consortia increase over time, those savings will become much more pronounced. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation. That's the boring science bit in the middle. So I'll hand you back now to Josh to talk about recommendations and what to be done moving forward.
Brilliant, thank you, Phil. So based on the recommendations and based on the analysis that Phil just described and the policy environment that we talked about earlier, we've analysed the landscape in the Czech Republic. We've looked at initiatives that are happening elsewhere in the world, and we are able to come down to some very specific recommendations, which I'll come to in a moment. But just to explain to dive into the concept of PID adoption that Phil was talking about there with the logistic function, the lazy S curve, and so on. What that looks like in practice can be considered as two different factors. They're interdependent. There's PID coverage. Now, this is, if you like, the number of people who have a phone number, and then there's PID integrations, which, if you like, is the number of actual phone connections, the ability to connect your phone to the wider network. So if we're talking about PID coverage, it's like how many researchers have an ORCID. If only 5% of researchers have an ORCID ID, there's very little incentive to use ORCID IDs, but there's also very little incentive for an institution or a publisher or a funder to use their resources to actually integrate the ORCID API into their system. PID integrations are what enable the benefits of PIDs to be delivered into the system. So they transfer metadata, they register the identifier and transmit it onwards. And this is actually where those time savings come from. So what we say here is PID adoption is the result of both PID coverage and PID integration. And the greater the level of PID coverage, the higher the potential value of a PID integration. So there are two ways to measure PID coverage. And where the total number of, when you know how many projects there are, you know how many researchers there are, you can say that you have, if there are 100,000 researchers and 60,000 ORCID IDs registered, it's a 60% coverage rate. Because you can express the number of the level of PID coverage as a percentage of the total number of those entities that would be identified by that identifier. If you do not have the total number of things, like we give the example on the slide here of data sets, we don't know how many data sets have been produced at any given time in anywhere in the world, because they might be on hard drives, they might be on USB drives in someone's desk drawer, they might be in the form of a spreadsheet sitting on someone's PC or in the cloud, or they may be a data set in a repository. So what we need to do is measure the change over time by looking at the number of DOIs, for example, for data sets that are registered, and the rates of registration each year, so we can see how that is changing. Now, the reason this matters is because based on the CARDS project wanting to demonstrate the value of that funding and the impact that it has had, we need an objective way to measure the change over time. So understanding that PID adoption is the goal, and there are two components to PID adoption. This is one, PID coverage. So it's really important to be able to measure that. To measure PID integrations, this is where a software instance, that could be a repository, it could be a human resources management system, has an active connection to the PID registry API and is reading metadata from the registry, is pulling information in. It is adding metadata to records or pushing information out to be shared onwards, or it's doing both of those things. And the simple way to measure that is by counting the number of active API connections. Now, at this point in time, we do not have access to data to evaluate the levels of PID integrations. So it's really critical that we develop this. And the only reliable method we have found for assessing this that actually gets to all of the potential integrations and tells us what they're being used for is to use a survey. So the reason I've talked about these kind of these points in so much detail is because this is the core of our recommendations. We are coming back in 2028 to do a follow-up analysis. Between now and that second analysis, there will be some follow-up research which will be led by Hannah and the team at NTK and the PID department there to survey levels of current and planned PID integrations and to evaluate the coverage of the Czech research entities within PID registries. We recommend setting a medium to longer term target of 80% coverage across 5 priority PIDs. Those are PIDs for people, for organizations, for outputs, that's data, publications, journal articles, and so on, for grants and for projects. We also recommend that there is a program here to explain the value of PIDs to Czech institutions and researchers to increase adoption and acceptance, and that helps to unlock the coverage benefits. Also, by improving the coverage of persistent identifiers, you improve the visibility of Czech research in these global PID registries, which actually means that the proportion of Czech research that is internationally visible and discoverable increases as well. To help to improve the efficiencies across the entire Czech system in line with, for example, the RIS3 strategy, we recommend the implementation of persistent identifiers in shared national systems as building the APIs into these shared services that the benefit there is also those shared national systems enable small institutions who may not have the resources, the budget, or the technical ability to build their own institutional implementation of identifiers. They could benefit from the shared national systems as well. So it's making sure that these efficiency gains are spread fairly across the whole research system in the Czech Republic. Finally, our last recommendation was that additional research would be helpful to identify some of those, we call them keystone systems. The keystone is the top of the arch. So when you build an arch, you build the sides and you have the curve at the top and you put in a stone at the top that locks the arch and makes it solid. The idea there is these keystone systems are the ones that aggregate a lot of research information and cascade it onwards. So it's those points where the data is collected and then can be shared. Making those systems work well with PIDs maximizes the potential for sharing that information onwards. So those are our recommendations and the rationale for those. I think I'll stop there. That's our last slide. I just want to say thank you very much for your attention, and we look forward to your questions and comments and sharing the discussion now.
Thank you all. I would like to kindly ask you if you can fill in our questionnaire My colleague will insert the link into the chat, or she will send it by email. Okay. And at the end, I would like to invite you for our other events of EOS Training Center. On Tuesday, in 2 days, there will be online presentation. Several specialists will address the topic concerning research on human subjects, legal and ethical aspects of handling sensitive data. This course will not be recorded, so if you are interested in this topic, I would recommend to join the seminar. And at the beginning of June, summer school for data stewards will take place in Ostrava. Registration will start soon, and program is already published on our website, on our EOS website. There will be several Czech experts, and I would like to highlight Christian Steiner from Graz. He will address the topic of data cleaning and data processing, and he also gives lectures at well-known Vienna courses. So that's some invitations, some recommendations from EOS Training Center. And thank you all for joining us today for the webinar. Bye-bye.